Imagine holding like the winning lottery ticket to the future of technology,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
But you're so incredibly busy protecting your 1990s legacy that you almost throw it away.
Which is wild to think about now, given where they are.
It really is. You know how there are certain things in your life that are so essential to your daily routine that you completely stop noticing them?
Yeah, totally.
Like the water heater in your basement. Or maybe that one incredibly sturdy filing cabinet in your office.
Right. It's just part of the background environment. I mean, you only really think about it if it stops working.
Exactly. It holds everything together. It's definitely load-bearing, but you would never, ever describe it as interesting.
No, definitely not.
And for a very long time, that is exactly how the tech world viewed Microsoft.
Yeah.
It was the tech equivalent of a sturdy filing cabinet.
It was just Windows on your desk, Office on your laptop, and that was it.
Yeah. But today, we are taking a deep dive into how that exact same background furniture quietly executed what might be, honestly, the most consequential reinvention in the history of modern technology.
It's an amazing story.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a fantastic, incredibly revealing piece from the June 2026 issue of Tech Reader magazine. It's by Aaron Rose, titled Microsoft's Emerging Identity in the Age of AI.
Highly recommend reading it if you haven't yet.
For sure. And our mission for you today is to decode exactly how a company goes from being the boring legacy brand of the 90s to orchestrating the entire artificial intelligence revolution right from the server room up.
It really is a remarkable trajectory, and to fully appreciate the scale of this pivot, you have to understand just how dominant they used to be and then how sharply they stalled out.
Right. Let's set the baseline here. We're talking about a company that started in a strip mall in Albuquerque, New Mexico back in 1975.
Which sounds so crazy now.
Right. Bill Gates and Paul Allen had this idea that was actually highly radical at the time, which was software as a standalone product.
Yeah, because before that, you bought a massive mainframe computer, and the software just came with it. It wasn't a separate thing.
Exactly. The idea that you would buy a program on a floppy disk, to run on your own machine, that changed the world.
It did, and they rode that idea to absolute total dominance.
I mean, by the 1990s, 9 out of 10 personal computers ran Microsoft software.
They were everywhere.
They survived the massive shift to the internet, but then they hit the smartphone era.
Oh, yeah.
And they stumbled through mobile hard.
Which created a fascinating contradiction that the article highlights perfectly. By the early 2010s, Microsoft was still highly profitable.
Right, they weren't going bankrupt.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It wasn't failing in a financial sense. Windows still shipped. Office was an absolute cash cow. The Xbox was making real money in gaming. But the company had essentially calcified. They were a legacy brand. They had completely missed the mobile revolution, just watching Apple and Google divide up the smartphone world. And they were actively losing the emerging cloud computing race to Amazon, whose lead looked practically insurmountable to most observers at the time.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before they could build the AI future we are living in right now, Microsoft actually had to dismantle their own internal psychological roadblocks.
Yes, the internal culture was a huge issue.
We have to talk about Satya Nadella taking over as CEO in February 2014, because he inherits this massive company that is technically fine on paper, right?
Yeah, they were making money.
But strategically, they are just lumbering behind the competition, protecting their old castles.
And Nadella's response to this crisis wasn't some massive, flashy hardware product launch. He didn't do a hostile takeover of a mobile competitor.
Right.
He comes in and announces this phrase, mobile first, cloud first.
Which, I mean, on the surface, that sounds exactly like the kind of generic corporate speak that speechwriters hand to incoming CEOs, just to make them sound forward-thinking.
Oh, absolutely. It sounds like pure boardroom bingo.
Totally.
It really does. But in practice, it triggered a massive, ruthless operational shift inside the company.
How so?
Well, the cloud-first part meant that Azure, which was Microsoft's cloud computing platform that had been growing somewhat quietly in the background, that became the center of gravity for the entire corporation.
Wow.
Everything else, Windows, Office, Xbox, all of it, was suddenly evaluated by one single metric.
And what was that?
Does this accelerate or does this slow down our cloud transformation? It became the organizing principle of the whole company.
But the article makes a very pointed argument that the operational shift wasn't actually the hardest part, right? It was the cultural shift.
Yeah, the human element.
Nadella started pushing this idea that Microsoft needed to move from being a company of know-it-alls to a company of learn-it-alls.
Right.
And I have to push back on this a little bit because as I was reading the source material, my initial reaction was a massive eye roll.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Are phrases like growth mindset and learn it all really the reason a multi-billion-dollar company turns around? Isn't that just motivational fluff you put on a poster in the break room?
I can see why you'd think that.
I mean, think about it. You have this massive monopoly culture that is used to dominating through sheer force and market share. Is changing a know-it-all culture essentially like trying to convince a heavyweight boxing champion that they suddenly need to learn rhythmic gymnastics?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the source text directly addresses that exact skepticism.
Okay.
It acknowledges that a learn-it-all culture sounds like a motivational poster, but it explains the actual physical mechanics of why it matters to product development.
Break that down for me.
So a company built on dominance, a heavyweight champion, to use your analogy, develops a very specific, rigid posture. They become highly territorial.
Right, defending their belt.
Exactly. They become fiercely protective of their existing revenue streams, like Windows licenses. They are certain of their own rightness.
Yeah, the know-it-all mentality.
And mathematically speaking, a protective know-it-all culture physically cannot make risky, unproven bets. They allocate their engineering resources to optimize what already exists. They wait for someone else to prove a market is safe before they enter it.
Because if you already have the gold medal, you don't want to play a new game where you might lose. You just want to keep playing the game you already won.
Precisely. To change the trajectory, Nadella had to force the company to be curious, collaborative, and most importantly, willing to be wrong.
Which is hard for a giant tech company.
Very. There is a great quote from Nadella in the Case that sums up the stakes. He says, "Longevity in this business is about being able to reinvent yourself or invent the future.
Wow.
If you aren't allowed to fail, you can't invent the future." And the financial results of dismantling that psychological roadblock are staggering.
Yeah, the numbers are insane.
When Nadella took over in 2014, Microsoft's market capitalization was roughly $300 billion. By 2026, it is $3.7 trillion.
That's a more than 10x increase.
Built entirely on abandoning that know-it-all posture.
And that willingness to be a learn-it-all, right? To take a massive unproven risk without a guaranteed payoff. That is the direct mechanism that led Microsoft to spot an obscure San Francisco research lab in 2019.
Yes, exactly.
We are talking, of course, about OpenAI.
Right. And you have to remember, back in 2019, OpenAI was absolutely not a household name.
Not at all.
Sam Altman, Elon Musk, and a few others had spun it up a few years earlier in 2016, but to most of the tech world, it was just an eccentric, nonprofit research lab.
Just a bunch of smart people tinkering.
Pretty much. Very few people understood what they were actually building or if their approach to artificial intelligence would even work. Yet Microsoft looks at them and makes a staggering $1 billion investment.
And at the time, the mainstream press barely noticed. It looked like just another corporate hedge, throwing money at an interesting space.
Right.
But there was a hidden genius to this deal. Microsoft didn't just hand over $1 billion in cash and wish them luck.
No, they did not.
They mandated that OpenAI had to build and train its models exclusively on Azure.
This is the critical mechanism of the entire story. Microsoft agreed to build the supercomputers, and OpenAI agreed to do the research exclusively on those supercomputers.
Wow.
To facilitate this, Microsoft built a custom Azure supercomputer specifically to train OpenAI's models.
Let's pause on that. What does that actually mean?
We are talking about networking together tens of thousands of highly advanced graphics processing units, GPUs, in a way that had never been done before.
It's just a massive undertaking.
Huge! They built a machine that would have ranked in the top 5 publicly disclosed supercomputers in the entire world, and they built it just for this one single partner.
Just to handle the sheer mind-boggling scale of the math, the article mentions GPT-3, which was trained on this hardware, and it had 175 billion parameters.
Yeah, a massive leap.
Let's define that for the listener, because that number is insane. To put that in perspective, if parameters are essentially the synapses in an AI's digital brain, the connections that allow it to recognize patterns and make associations 175 billion, meant this thing was suddenly complex enough to require a supercomputer just to hold a thought.
Exactly.
And eventually GPT-4 came along, which was vastly larger. When these models started showing these weird emergent properties, writing poetry, debugging code, reasoning across domains, all of that bleeding-edge research was happening on Microsoft's physical hardware.
Yes. They merged the most advanced AI research in the world with basically infinite compute power.
It's wild.
It was a symbiotic relationship where the software pushed the limits of the hardware and the hardware enabled the breakthroughs in the software.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if you look at the launch of ChatGPT in November of 2022, you see the brilliant infrastructure trap Microsoft set.
Oh, the timing was perfect.
ChatGPT hits 100 million users in 2 months. That is faster than TikTok. It is faster than Instagram.
Yeah.
The entire tech landscape rearranged itself literally overnight.
It was a frenzy.
And Microsoft's strategy here reminds me of the shift to electric vehicles. It's like Microsoft realized that instead of trying to build the absolute best electric car on the market themselves, they should just quietly own the entire power grid.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. No matter whose AI wins the race, they all have to plug into Microsoft's wall to charge.
That is exactly the dynamic. Microsoft became the invisible layer beneath the most discussed consumer software launch in history.
Think about the first time you, listening to this, used ChatGPT. You typed a question, and you were probably amazed by how fast it typed a complex answer back to you.
Yeah, it felt like magic.
But what you were actually feeling in that moment was the sheer horsepower of a top 5 global supercomputer that Microsoft had built in secret years earlier, just humming away in a server farm somewhere.
And what's crucial is how quickly that invisible layer became highly visible in Microsoft's own products.
Oh, they move fast.
They took OpenAI's technology and wove it into everything. Bing got a conversational layer that generated more press for the search engine in 1 week than it had seen in a decade.
Seriously, people were actually talking about Bing.
GitHub Copilot became the absolute standard tool for professional software developers, writing code alongside them. Microsoft 365 began embedding AI directly into Word, Excel, Teams, and Outlook.
They just pushed it everywhere.
They didn't just build the infrastructure, they integrated the capabilities into the tools that run the modern workplace.
But that strategy of being the exclusive landlord to OpenAI had a ticking clock.
It did.
Once ChatGPT hit 100 million users and became a global phenomenon, OpenAI suddenly had the leverage to renegotiate.
Everything changed.
The unprecedented overnight success completely altered the power dynamic between the two companies. It pulled us out of the initial patron and beneficiary phase and into a highly complex new alliance.
It's a fascinating evolution. In the April 2026 restructuring of their partnership, the exclusivity that defined the early years is gone. OpenAI can now offer its models across other cloud providers like Amazon. Now, Azure remains the primary cloud partner, and OpenAI products still ship first on Azure. But the days of Microsoft being OpenAI's only home are definitively over.
The financials shifted too, right? Moving to a capped profit structure running through 2030, with Microsoft continuing as a major shareholder.
Yes.
They also retain a license to OpenAI's intellectual property and those first ship rights until 2032. But the most interesting part of the restructuring to me was that they completely removed the clauses tied to artificial general intelligence, or AGI. And why did they do that?
Well, because the AGI clauses introduced massive legal and structural liability.
How so?
Under the original deal, if OpenAI actually achieved AGI, which is loosely defined as an autonomous system that surpasses human capabilities in most economically valuable tasks.
Basically a superintelligence.
Right. If they hit that, Microsoft's commercial license to the technology would instantly terminate.
Wow. So it was essentially a kill switch to prevent a single massive corporation from owning a digital god.
Exactly. It was a safety mechanism. But as these models got smarter and smarter, defining what actually triggered that kill switch became a nightmare.
I bet.
If an AI passes the bar exam, is it AGI? If it can write a novel, is it AGI? That ambiguity became a massive liability for Microsoft's investors, who were pouring billions into a technology they might suddenly lose the rights to on a technicality.
That makes a lot of sense from a business perspective.
By removing those clauses, they simplified the arrangement so both businesses could operate with clearer, safer horizons.
I see the logic, but I'm still extremely skeptical of the narrative the PR departments are pushing here.
Really? Why?
If you are Microsoft and you see OpenAI taking their models to Amazon's cloud, and at the very same time, you are actively building your own internal AI models that don't depend on OpenAI at all. Isn't this essentially a slow-motion breakup?
Well,
I mean, you call it maturation, but it feels like they are building separate lifeboats.
Right.
Aren't they just becoming direct competitors who happen to own a piece of each other?
if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really isn't a rupture. Both companies have simply outgrown the confines of their original 2019 arrangement.
Okay.
Think of it as a maturation of the relationship. OpenAI is preparing for a public offering. And to satisfy Wall Street, they need to build their own independent infrastructure and prove they can maintain multiple commercial relationships.
Right, they can't just be a Microsoft subsidiary in all but name.
Exactly. Microsoft, meanwhile, has an absolute fiduciary obligation to diversify its own AI capabilities so it isn't entirely dependent on a single external lab, no matter how advanced that lab is.
Makes sense.
Yes, they will compete in some spheres, but their mutual reliance, especially Microsoft's IP rights through 2032, means it's a durable strategic alliance.
I'm still a bit cynical about how durable it will be in the long run, but let's look at what Microsoft is actually building in their lifeboat. Because Microsoft is no longer solely reliant on OpenAI's exclusive models, they are now defining their own overarching computing paradigm for the rest of the 2020s.
And that takes us to the June 2026 Microsoft Build Conference in San Francisco.
Yes, this is where we start to see Microsoft's endgame.
And this is where Satya Nadella framed the current moment in incredibly ambitious terms. He declared that the tech industry is moving out of the cloud-native era and into what he called an agent-native stack.
Agent-native stack. Let's break that down for the listener.
No.
What does he actually mean by that?
He contextualized it by saying, we have moved past the discovery phase of AI. The discovery phase was the last few years, where the technology was new, surprising, and interesting. We were all just figuring out what a chatbot could do.
Yeah, the honeymoon phase.
Right. Now, he says, we are entering the phase of widespread diffusion.
Diffusion.
Diffusion is when a technology stops being a shiny novelty and becomes boring, reliable infrastructure. An agent-native stack means AI isn't just a chatbot you talk to in a browser window.
Then what is it?
It is an autonomous agent that operates in the background, executing multi-step tasks across different software and hardware environments without you holding its hand.
And the article details the announcement of this new Copilot super app, and specifically this autopilot function. This is AI that doesn't just assist you, it executes tasks autonomously.
Yes.
The example given in the piece is a software developer who wants to build a customer support agent. They don't write the scaffolding code or manually link databases anymore.
Nope.
They just describe the workflow in plain language to the autopilot system. The system then assembles the code, tests it for bugs, provisions the servers, and deploys it entirely autonomously. The human just supervises the final result.
It's doing the actual labor.
So what does this all mean? If you're listening to this, think about the tools you use every single day at your job. The shift Microsoft is making is the difference between having a super smart spell checker that highlights your mistakes and having an autonomous ghostwriter who just writes the book, publishes it to your website, and then answers the fan mail for you, all while you watch from the sidelines.
It is a profound shift in how humans interact with machines. But as the source points out, this transition to widespread diffusion is not happening without real friction.
Definitely not.
The deep dive highlights genuine anger among API developers following the Build conference. Microsoft changed their billing structure from a token-based model to a consumption-based pricing model, and developers realized this was going to be significantly steeper than what they had been planning around.
Let's clarify that difference because it's huge. A token-based model is kind of like an all-you-can-eat buffet. You pay a flat rate or a predictable fee per interaction, and you largely know what your costs are going to be.
Right.
A consumption-based model is paying by the ounce. It meters the exact computational intensity of what you are asking the AI to do.
Which is very different.
And developers were furious because it completely ruins their ability to forecast their business expenses. It's one thing to build your business on a tool. It's another when the landlord suddenly jacks up the rent based on exactly how much water you use.
It validates a classic tension in platform businesses. On one side, you have the infrastructure provider, Microsoft. They have spent billions on custom supercomputers, the energy grid to power them, and the data centers to house them.
Got to get that money back somehow.
Exactly. They have to monetize that massive capital expenditure. On the other side, you have the ecosystem of developers building apps on top of that infrastructure, and they desperately need predictable costs to survive.
Yeah.
Those two interests often collide. When Nadella talks about diffusion, what he's really saying is that AI is no longer a fun toy you play with for free, it is a utility bill. And right now, the industry is arguing bitterly over the meter rates.
Which really brings the arc of this entire journey into focus. Microsoft goes from being the boring, invisible furniture of the tech world, a company that completely missed the mobile revolution because they were too busy protecting their monopoly,
to embracing this learn-it-all culture under Satya Nadella.
Yes. And because they changed their psychological mindset, They were able to make the billion-dollar bet on OpenAI, build the supercomputers to train those models, and essentially orchestrate the AI revolution from the server room up.
And the reason this matters to you, listening to this right now, is that whether you actively open an AI chatbot today or not, that invisible layer of Azure is now woven into the fabric of the modern internet.
It's inescapable.
It is in the tools you use for work. It is in the software that manages your bank's data. It is in the logistics networks that deliver your packages. Microsoft's infrastructure is the load-bearing foundation of the next era of computing.
Which leaves me with a final thought that I couldn't shake after reading this piece.
What's that?
If Microsoft actually succeeds in building this agent-native world, a world where software autonomously builds, executes, and manages complex workflows, just by us speaking plain English to it, what happens to human digital literacy?
Ooh, this raises an important question about exactly what we are trading away.
Right. If the machine does the driving, are we about to forget how to use computers? Think about what GPS did to us.
That's a scary comparison.
GPS is an amazing technology, but it absolutely made us forget how to read a physical map, how to navigate by landmarks, and how to maintain an internal sense of direction.
We just blindly follow the blue line.
Exactly. If this new autopilot stack does all the coding, all the routing, all the execution, are we essentially outsourcing our understanding of the digital world to Microsoft's servers? Will the next generation even know how an operating system works, or will they just know how to talk to the agent?
We might be trading foundational capability for ultimate convenience on a species-wide level.
Exactly. Something to mull over the next time you ask a machine to do your work for you. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions. Keep that learn-it-all mindset alive. And remember to occasionally take a good, hard look at the furniture in the room. You never know what it might turn into next.